Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you. As you can see, we're trying a little bit of technological innovation here this morning. First and foremost, let me join our opening speakers in welcoming you and thanking you very much for joining us this morning. There's an old American adage says you should not mention religion or politics at a party, but for Ben's 100th, we're doing both today and stirring things up a bit. And I think this, I'd like to thank Dr. Bruce Hemmer for starting us off well. And then today we're going to move to a panel on Nigeria, which is a country many of you know is one of the few countries in the world that is evenly divided between Islam and Christianity. And the dividing line between Islam and Christianity runs right through more or less the middle of the country. And I've had the distinct honor and privilege of working with an organization that is located right there on that fault line, the Interfaith Mediation Center. In particular, Pastor James Wuye and Imam Muhammad Ashafa, who will be joining us on this panel today. IMC is an organization that was founded in the mid-1990s precisely to do interreligious conflict resolution. And Pastor James and Imam Ashafa will tell us a little bit about that in a moment. I'm also very privileged to say that we are joined today on the panel by General Abdurrahman Dambazao. He is a retired general of the Nigerian Army. He was Chief of Army Staff, which is the highest ranking Army position in the Nigerian military, up until several years ago. He oversaw the military during a very, very difficult time in Nigeria's history when the president at that time, President Yar'Adua, was sick and then later passed away. The general is also the head of an NGO in northern Nigeria doing development work and has extensive experience in politics across the country and will share his thoughts with us as well. We are also joined today by Dave Joseph on my far left, who is Senior Vice President for Programs at Public Conversations Project, one of the leading dialogue organizations in the greater Boston area and nationwide. He has also been working with us with IMC, and we'll hear from him as well. And then Mads Palihapatia from the Massachusetts Office of Public Collaborations. Mads is an expert on early warning systems and is also working with IMC on the early warning system development. So you're going to hear quite a bit this morning about IMC and its approaches in dealing with religious conflict. Let me just add one more bit about Nigeria for those of you who are not following politics there very closely. Nigeria has a major election coming up next year. And the way the politics are shaping up at the moment is the current president is a Christian from the south part of the country, and it's entirely likely that the opposition candidate will be a Muslim candidate from the north. So this is also, in addition to the many local communal dynamics, there are local level conflicts in Nigeria, there are state level conflicts, and there are also national level conflicts that are going on. At the national level, we have a major political fault line that is also lighting up and is part of the story of the upheavals you may have been reading in the newspapers in Nigeria over the last year. So we have a very interesting case study, and my colleagues here that I'm very privileged to introduce to you will be taking us deeper in that. I'm going to be moderating the conversation. I'm going to push each of them a little bit after they speak to follow up on a key point or two. And then we're going to engage you in a little bit of a different way in terms of getting your questions to the panelists. So stick around because we'd like to hear from as many of you as possible. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that when we get to that portion of the discussion. Unfortunately, Pastor James had a problem with his flight and is not able to be here in person. But as you can see, well, we will see in a moment. Voila. That's Pastor James up there on the far right. There we go. Pastor, can you still hear me?
Loud and clear.
Wonderful.
Good morning, everyone out there.
Thank you. Please go ahead. I have your slides also shown up on the screen, so I will be moving those as you speak.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Darren, and our esteemed General, of course, and my colleague, Imam Dr. Mohammed Nurai Shafa. I want to apologize to everyone out there that I'm not able to make it this time, but though you can see me on the screen, my spirit physically is with you on the ground there. Now, coming straight to the discussion of the day, how we are helping the Muslims and Christians to talk across the red line. I will say the red line because young people have been stereotyped from childhood. The problem we are even grappling with now is an issue of from age 6 to age 15 that need to be de-radicalized because they have participated in the violence and there are killings all over. And so in our efforts to get these young people to begin to reintegrate, we have decided to use a hybrid, which I believe Dave is going to speak with you in a moment. We are using a reflective structured dialogue process to engage the people. And this engagement has really helped tremendously. While we are doing this, people are reconciling. For instance, we have a situation in Riom. Riom is in Plateau State, where a Fulani, a Biroman accused a Fulani man of stealing his cattle. And for over years, since the increase, the escalation of the violence, no single Muslim has stepped to Riom without a guide, even to the point of praying. So our process have developed a safe platform that 3 Muslims of Fulani extract. One is what they call the Mieti Allah leader. One is called an Ardo. An Ardo in Fulani means a chief. And then we have a youth. Together, a Christian there in Riom got them water and provided them a space to do the afternoon prayer. This is part of the effort. We don't go to tell them we want to reconcile them. Rather, we discuss with them about issues on the ground, and they evolve a system that is working. What most worrisome for us is that there is a new rate, a new group of people that we need to address. And whoever is listening out there, we need to begin to address young people between the ages of 6 to the ages of 15. Now, our strategy is that we use traditional leaders. That is leaders not on the very top, not those at the level of emirs or kings. Rather, we use the very low level, what we call ward heads, to catalyze for discussion at the grassroots. And that has been yielding tremendous effort. Then number 2, effect. Number 2, we use traditional leaders, which I believe my colleague Imam will elaborate on that, how we bring also religious leaders on the platform of CAN and GNI, Jamaat Nasr Islam, where they are not existing, we use any religious leader on the ground that is a stakeholder. Of course, cardinal principle about our workers are also the youth. It is the youth that said that the problem of the youth above 16, 17, 18 is no more the issue. Even the youth themselves are struggling with how to handle ages 6 to 15. The adolescents, they are the ones that are used now in throwing the stones and carrying petrol for arsones. Then the women, we are so excited. Last week, precisely on Friday, on Thursday, Tuesday, we had a program in Riom, and one of the women leaders who was with us was going home with her husband, and a group of people shot the husband on the foot. Right now, he's in the hospital, and IMC is trying to reach out to those people. A quick about one of the major challenges. Like in Tafawa Balewa, where we went, I'm going to show a picture of some biscuits. Our Rwandan friend went to discuss with some little children who are helping us to clean the school where Tafawa Balewa, the first Prime Minister of Nigeria, had his first education. And he went, met with these children and said, who am I? They say, he said, do you like Muslims? All the children, about 11 of them in chorus, said, no. He said, why do you hate the Muslims? He said, because they don't like us, and they kill our parents. Now, these are ages between 9 and 13. And then a Muslim friend of ours, Imam Sani Isa, was called to the hall, was called to where these children are, and he brought along with him some biscuits. Our friend, these are the biscuits. As you may see on the screen there, these are the biscuits. I am showing you here on my table.
Uh-oh. Oh, there we go. Okay. I think we'll have to stop there, and maybe we can try to bring him in a little bit later. I'm going to turn now, Imam Ashafa, you heard a few of the things that Pastor James was saying. I know that it was a little hard to hear some of it. If you wanted to quickly echo a point or two that he was saying, and then go ahead and take your comments from here, we'd be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Distinguished brothers and sisters, I greet you with the greeting of peace by saying Assalamu alaikum, meaning may peace and blessing be with you all. Today is a very important day for us, and especially for our centenarian who is in our midst, who have graciously supported this important occasion. I want to say thank you very much to people like you for your effort, for your contribution in this direction. What my friend was just saying, Pastor Dr. James Wuye, about the children, this is the level of hate transferred at the family level, in our local community level, how children were meant to see the others as the enemy, as don't touch them, don't get closer, creating walls instead of bridges across the divide. These are children whom a Rwandan from UMass, who is working with us as a program officer. He's a Christian. When he got there, they see a Christian, they see a friend. And he's accepted immediately. And he asked them, do you love a Muslim? They say, no. Why don't you love a Muslim? Because they are murderers. And these are children, when the crisis happened, most of them were not born. The crisis happened almost 20 years ago in Tafawa Balewa. And it continued consistently in the last 10 years. And we're looking for a solution to that crisis in Tafawa Balewa. So, but what they had, they are not primary victims. What they had heard from their parent. And this guy, that is Seth Karamage, he gave them biscuits as a gift. They all were happy collecting the biscuits. And after the 11 of them collect the biscuit, the imam came in, who is my deputy, came into the hall inside the school. And they said, do you know this? They say, who is he? He's a Muslim. Do you like him? They say, no, but he's my friend. Why don't you like him? The next thing, the anger was transferred to the Christian partner there. They returned the gift of the biscuit he shared with the student. The first two rejected it. Then the next thing, all others dropped the biscuit. In fact, they threw it at him and ran away from the hall in the school that was attended by the first Nigerian prime minister who struggled for the independence of that country. In a school that was abandoned for almost 5 good years. No child could go to that school because of the conflict. And the government reopened the school. And this is the first encounter they have with the other. They don't even want to see his face. And anybody, so you become the enemy of my friend, become my enemy. Or the friend of my enemy becoming my enemy. That metaphor of hate transfer is what you could see the magnitude. So when you talk of bridging the divide, at the local level where we are working as an organization, there is a big challenge for us. And this challenge were informed by so many factors. Number one factor that sustained those challenges is the issue of politicization of religion. When our political actors use religion as a bait in order to win political office. When they come to the local level, they play the carrot of religion. But when they are at the national level, they play a different ideological framework. Muslim and Christian politicians work together, collectively side by side at the national level. But at the local level where we worked, it was a different story. The second important factor was the factor of indigeneity, indigenization versus citizenship. The indigeneity here is primordial loyalty to indigene, to ethnic identity over national identity. At the local level, many people were addressed as seen from the context of their ethnic identity or religious identity. So citizens is valued or devalued based on where are you at each point of your participation in the national affairs, or where you reside at which point. If you reside in the south, you are a southerner, you are more a Nigerian. And when you reside as a northerner, you are more a Nigerian than the southerner being a northerner, or a northerner being a southerner. These are the second key factors that has sprung serious effect on our worldview. And the third one is lack of mainstreaming peace education in our religious educational institution. In Nigeria, in public and both the private school, religious education is compulsory at the primary level and secondary level. So you have professional religious teachers who are in this educational facility that are supposed to teach ethical values, the values of human dignity, of integrity, purity, honesty, selfless service, and compassion to your community. Most of them, and the culture of peace is not engraved within it. That makes it difficult to sustain the hate that transfer from generation to generations in our communities. And if you tell me, how do we deal with the situations? In our experiences, we have evolved 16 different methodology of dealing with some of these challenges. Some of them have been used across the continent of Africa, in Egypt, in Sudan, in Kenya, in Somalia, in Burundi, in Sierra Leone, and other parts of Africa. Likewise across the global world, where we share our experiences. But the most important in Nigeria specifically, and at the local level where we work, one of the key elements of our intervention is mentoring of imam and pastors. We have a program on mentoring, training, capacity for young imam and pastors to have a culture of inclusiveness against the culture of exclusivism. Secondly, we have a deprogramming and reprogramming programs where here we identify radicalized youth, extremist groups, try to create a program of taking them away from radicalization into a moderate voice across our community. That is not enough. Then we have what we call face-to-faith, where scriptural texts are used in navigating an open identity against an exclusive identity, in promoting positive solidarity over negative solidarity. Negative solidarity here, we are the same tribe, the same, I sympathize with his challenge, but if he's from the other tribe, he has no share in me. So this negative, removing negative identity, solidarity, and promoting positive solidarity. We use that framework very strongly in helping to promote similarities against dissimilarities within our faith and traditions. We have a working document, a book titled The Pastor and the Imam Responding to Conflict. And in this book, we bring 75 areas of similarities between Islam and Christian tradition. Because across the Abrahamic tradition, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, 75 areas of scriptural similarities that every Muslims, every Christian, they believe, they share as a common bond. And we have 25 areas of dissimilarities. Area Muslim and Christian would never agree. When one compromises, the other ceases to be who he is or who she is. And that takes us to another important component is promoting what we engage in media dialogue. In our media dialogue that we do every day is advocacy and sensitization of the local community on how to engage. And here we emphasize interfaith theology of communication. Interfaith theology of communication. What do I say? Being sensitive to the cultural norms, the values, and orientation of the other. How do I become sensitive to the others, even in expressing myself, in expressing my desire without hurting the other? Here we look at scriptural texts. What are the scripture texts about this? And we promote this on radio, televisions, live programs on radio, live programs on televisions, and then we do some editing and others. We have some people here who have been part of us who came to Nigeria, and we do that together. Distinguished brothers and sisters, if you look at that, then one of the important things, we have a documentary films or books, publications about our work that we use as tools, and we let students use them in schools on how best they can engage their community using those tools. Some of these tools were supported by U.S. Institute for Peace, who are here, Initiative of Change in Switzerland, and here in the U.S., and other organizations like the Tannenbaum Center for Interreligious Understanding, who have supported a lot of documents that we produce or they produce on our behalf as a role model. They call us icon of interfaith engagement in Nigeria. However, we know we are doing the little we can in order to create the dynamic of change in our society. Distinguished brothers and sisters, we strongly believe we have a strong network with madrasa and junior seminarians. Religious leaders within the madrasa and seminary are those we focus on them at the community level and helping them, because the radicalization process begins with this madrasa and the young, passionate, young Christians who want to become evangelists and evangelical missions, and young Muslims who want to be imams. So we get them through the proprietor of these schools and engage them in capacity building to create a change of directions. And of course, in doing most of these works, we have we have successfully almost getting to what we call promoting inclusive policy at the grassroots level. Here, one thing we did is what we call preachers' code of conduct. When the preachers want to preach as a religious leaders, what are the code of conduct? What are the ethics of what he says, what not to say in public square? And right now we are promoting hate speech bill in our society. And that hate speech, fortunately we are working with CPDD and our teams here in the UMass to see how do we have a hate speech, contextualizing hate speech in the context of Nigeria. Because Nigeria is passionately a religious continent, a religious society. So, that is some of the things we are doing that I feel, and one of the key work, we look at a way forward to say one of the important way forward we have for us to succeed is that how do we mainstream peace education in our religious educational curriculum? Here we need the research teams, the expert in developing pedagogies to help us how do we create an inclusive pedagogy within our worldview and our religious template. That is not just enough. And number two, very important element is we have developed an idea of establishing a training center, an institute called International Interfaith Institute of Peace in Nigeria, which focus is to look at the Abrahamic family. Unfortunately, in Nigeria, there are more Christian Muslims than any other religion in Nigeria who have been the problems within today. And so if we are to succeed in creating a paradigm shift from religion being part of the problem to religion being part of the solution, confronting the human family, we need an institute where these upcoming religious leaders across the line will be facilitated, will be trained, will be given capacity to be able to be the moderate voice, a voice of inclusiveness, without compromising their religious values, without compromising their religious ethical code, but still have an inclusive identity that consider the others or create a safe space for the others to be the best of what they want to be in their lives. And in doing that, we are developing a hybrid model of alternative dispute resolution and what we call restorative justice in our own society. Because people are living in what they are stuck to, victimhood, the memory of lost, the memory of historical injustices has created these sharp walls that we are trying to break. They prefer more iron fix than handshake. To break that, we need these hybrid models for us to use. And in doing that, we are trying finally to produce what we call an interfaith peace index. Today we have a global peace index. We have global GDPs that talk about how nations, developing nation, underdeveloped nations, etc., etc. Why don't you have an interfaith peace index that says the ideal religious community, based community that are motivated by their religious conviction, to say these are an ideal religious community, these religious, because they have 1, 2, 3, 4 indices of what religion is supposed to, end product of being religion. What do you end to win? From ritual to spiritual, what is the end profit? And in producing that end profit and end games, we need to have this important component. And that was why we are here to share the little we have, and we are very grateful to UMass, PCP, CDPDD, and so many of our teams and friends who have supported us as a local organizations, that our effort and impact are being felt in different parts of the world who are affected by religion being part of the problem, to say religion should be part of the solution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Imam. I would like to give you a quick 60 seconds more, if I may, to push on one point in particular. And I think this connects in with some of the points that Bruce made this morning. You work very closely with local pastors and imams, but as we mentioned, there are different levels to the conflict of local, state, and national. When the national leaders, who are far more politicized, given the power that they hold, and are not able to talk to each other in an effective way, how far can you go with the local leaders? Are you able to still work with the local leaders when the national leaders are fighting? Can you talk a little bit about this local-national division? How far can you go working in the grassroots when the national level is stuck?
One important thing we discovered is that there's a big disconnection between the senior religious leaders who are at the helm of affairs, who move around within the presidency, and those local religious leaders and local champions. Each one is at that level of individuality, each one building his niche. Some see the others as giving out, as compromising. So they don't even see most of these big leaderships as representative of their ideal. So because of that, in some of the states where we worked, we're able to work with them directly, or we work with the local council, which have a niche, a connecting point with the other part. And that informs one important component we have to say, at the local level, we have what we call early warning and early response system, which we are setting up with our brothers here, who the system is working. And in this system of early warning, early response, we encourage religious leaders at the local level to take the destiny of their own community in their own hand, not to wait for the government or for the Shura Council or the Fatwa Council that will come from up, or the higher evangelical councils to give in to what they need to do or what not to do. We need to remember, even as of today, there's a sect and division within mainstream of our religious organization and institution, either within the church or within the mosques. There is this level of division. So that authority is not too one-way straightforward like the presidency to the governor to the local government. In the religious affairs, the ideological differences in terms of operation also create that opportunity for us as peacemakers to use them from their own context and get to them to say, the destiny of your community lies in your own hand. Forget about the political guy, forget about the senior guys there, what do you do at the local context? And some of them hit into that. And we hope strongly with the early warning and early response system, which they are in charge at the local level, we are building another alternative of connecting with the local into the thinking globally and responding to local needs.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me turn over now to General Dumbazo. Sir, do you want to stand up here or do you want to stay there?
Yeah,
You there?
I'll sit.
Okay, thank you. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much for, for the invitation to this symposium and for the opportunity for me to contribute. I want to contribute on the basis of the fact that I'm an observer within my environment. I'm not an expert on religious affairs, neither am I involved in the kind of works, very important works, Imam Ashapa and Pastor James are doing. And I've met them a couple of times. We met in my office back home, and we discussed on very important issues. So I really appreciate what they are doing, and we need more people like them. Religion is a very, very important factor in Nigeria, and that has been said. And to some extent, I would say that religion pays. It pays in the sense that it has even become a business enterprise. So we need to understand that if we have to, design any program, thank you, on conflict resolution. In the past, where I come from, for instance, I'm from Kano, a northern city in Kano. I remember very well that before anybody, took up being an imam in a mosque, he has to be cleared in terms of his knowledge and the kind of things he's going to dish out to the public. But I don't know, I may be corrected, Imam is here. It doesn't appear to be the case these days for both the Christians and the Muslims. You find that particularly with the introduction of Pentecostalism that moved from here, US to Nigeria, you find a situation whereby almost everybody, in a Pentecostal church is a pastor. And he has, without maybe training for a month or so, he has a license to go out and tell people what he believes about what Christianity is all about. Likewise, you find that, among the Muslims, you find that almost everybody is an imam or a sheikh. And he uses that to tell people what he thinks Islam is all about. Certainly, there's a problem of regulation. And how the one challenge is how do you balance the issue of regulation versus the constitutional right to religion. So this is a very important issue. But the issue has been left for so long that it has accumulated to an extent that how to tackle it needs a lot of tact. Otherwise, somebody will start thinking that if you are a president, there is a Christian, and you want to regulate the number of imams, people will say that you are doing that because you hate Muslims. And if you are a Muslim, you want to regulate that, the Christian side will say you are doing that because you are targeting them. So it needs a lot of tact, but it's very, very important to regulate the activities of people. More so that most of these people use it to make money, and that money is not taxable. They don't tax them, nobody taxes them, because the tax regime in Nigeria is very, very weak. So, and that itself is an encouragement for many people to go into being a pastor or imam. So we really need to understand that. And I think that is the source of extremism, because a lot of these people gather, particularly, and I'm really curious with the kind of work they do, looking at those kids. You know, you gather them together, you tell them all kinds of things. And that is why I told my wife that anybody who, I want my children to be well brought up morally, but if we have to get somebody to teach them, he should come to my house to teach them, and I'll pay him. But I will not send my kids to a place I don't know, I cannot control. So these are the kind of things, I'm privileged to be able to pay for that, but there are so many who don't have that privilege, yet they want to educate their children to bring them up morally and so on and like that. But that is the danger of it. The second issue is that, as has been said, there's a lot of politicization of religion. And politicians, particularly now that elections are coming in 2015, next year, a lot of politicians are using religion as a factor, as a currency for mobilization. It's so glaring. They don't even think about. I'm happy he brought out the issue that at the national level, the two religions, you know, people adhering to the two religions do not have any problem with that, because that is an advantage to them. The president is a Christian, the vice president is a Muslim, all of them, you know, all they want is to retain the power, nothing more. So they could use that religion, you know, to advance that. It doesn't matter which religion you belong to. So that is very critical too. Now, how do you encourage conflict resolution in that kind of environment? So that is another challenge. And of course, we have this, we have a lot of, in addition to what IMC is doing, there is this NAREC, which is co-chaired by the Sultan of Sokoto and the Sultan of Sokoto, who is the head of the Muslims in Nigeria, and also the president of the Christian Association of Nigeria. So they co-chair that. It's a non-governmental organization, although supported by the government itself. They do a lot in order to, you know, enhance channel of communication and interaction, you know, that you know, will promote dialogue between Christians and Muslims. But of course, how far their effort goes down, and I think that is another challenge. And this is why efforts like what the IMC is doing is very, very important. So NAREC is doing a lot. Of course, for some time there's been a lull, because sometimes sometimes back when this issue of Northeast started, Boko Haram, the camp president came out to say that it was a deliberate effort by Muslims to wipe out Christians, blah, 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 which, of course, as of today, it has shown that that is not the case. So with that now, with all kind of noise, I think they have not been meeting as regular as they should. But that is very important organization that should be a platform for dialogue in Nigeria. Now, the media, I think, like you know, the media is very, very important in conflict resolution. But at the same time, too, the media can be a destroyer. And we've seen that in social media, a lot of hate speech coming out, and so on and so forth. So, and I think while we believe in media freedom, and I think those who are in charge should be very conscious of the fact that what they present to the public, the kind of agenda they define, will go a long way to either, make or mar the country. There is this group I came across in social media, Nigerians Against Religious Divide. So one of them, a member who requested if I would be interested to join, I accepted. That is the kind of thing that, so although sometimes somebody can make comments that are unpalatable, but it's a kind of effort that we should be able to encourage. Thank you very much. In my own small way, we have a foundation, as Darren has mentioned, which I chair, the Foundation for Victims of Child Abuse. Part of the effort we make is to see how we can remove some of the children, street children, and be able to place them properly, because some of these children also, are targets to be used by religious extremists in order to further, their whatever they have in mind. Then, of course, the issue of parental influence, which has been mentioned, and pastoral influence. This is an area that I think your organization should continue to hammer on in order to be able to get this kind of dialogue going on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Sir, if I may, just for 60 seconds more to push you on one particular question. I think with the Nigerian military engaged in 33 of the 36 states in Nigeria, there's a very important model here in terms of religious organizations or institutions working with peacekeeping operations in the field. I'm curious as to whether, do you see inroads for organizations like IMC or other religious figures, not just in Nigeria, but in other countries where you have peacekeeping operations, where religious institutions can interface with peacekeepers in a way that could be most productive? Are there possible low-hanging fruit, so to speak, that religious institutions could cooperate with peacekeeping troops in a way that could be more effective?
Yeah, there is, but that kind of arrangement is normally done at the level in which this peacekeeping is organized, whether at the regional level or at the UN level. But it's all part of humanitarian efforts, so there is. But since you brought that out, I want to also mention that in the military in Nigeria, for instance, we used to organize every Friday what we call Padre Hour for 1 hour. And this is a forum whereby our soldiers, both Christians and Muslims, sit down together, the imam and the pastors. We have, usually in the barracks, we have 2 churches and a mosque. The church for the Catholics, one for Protestants, and then one single mosque. So the pastors, the Catholic, the Protestant pastors, and the imam, they both sit in front of the soldiers and give kind of moral instructions, whether in peace or in war, things like that. And also every month we have what we call Durba, Unit Durba. The commanding officer sits with his soldiers and clear issues they have, or if anybody has any observation or recommendations within the unit, even if it borders on religion. He says, so those are the kind of avenues we use in order to enhance understanding among ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Let me turn over to Dave Joseph of Public Conversations. Do you want to stay there, or do you want to?
I'll stay here.
I will.
Okay. So what I'm going to be speaking about is religious peace building. Yes, you can start.
Okay, can you turn on the slides for us up onto the screen?
Okay. Religious peace building through personal narrative, and specifically the development of the hybrid model that we at Public Conversations and our partners at IMC have been working on for about the past year and a half. So I'd like to begin with a quote from the poet Audre Lorde. Darren? "It's not our differences that divide us, but rather our inability to recognize, accept, and celebrate those differences." So what narrative can do is to help to rehumanize the other and simultaneously oneself, and also to help address what both Pastor James and Imam Ashafa spoke of, which is the very early ages at which the kind of fear, stereotyping, demonization, and hatred begin to take place in society. What they haven't mentioned to you is their extraordinary personal journey, the narrative that gives them the credibility, that makes them the kind of people that when they offer their mentoring programs, the deprogramming, the work with leadership, the dialogue, the religious, the television programming that they do, why anybody pays attention. So I'm going to do that briefly, and what I'm going to encourage those of you who've not yet seen the Imam and the Pastor, the USIP film, you can see it on the internet, you can buy it. It's an extraordinary narrative journey that the pastor and the imam shared together. So quickly, what I would say is that 20 years ago, these two gentlemen each led a warring militia defending his faith. And when everybody's defending, pretty soon things happen. Pastor James lost his right hand in combat. Imam Ashafa lost his spiritual mentor and several family members to members of Pastor James' militia. Flip. In 1995, a journalist challenged them to make peace in Kaduna. And that's about the time that Pastor James heard one of his colleagues say that you cannot preach Christ with hate in your heart. And Imam Ashafa heard similar messages, and Imam Ashafa reached out to Pastor James, and it took a long time. It did not happen quickly, but through their perseverance, their sharing their narratives, and their courage, they began to make peace with each other and to establish the Muslim-Christian Dialogue Forum, which eventually became the Interfaith Mediation Center. So let me tell you a little bit about the birth of what Pastor James referred to as reflective structured dialogue, and I'm going to use the term today, reflective structured narrative approach. In 2009, Darren and I went to Nigeria and visited about 15 peace-building organizations. I was fortunate enough to be able to accompany him again the following year and deliver a workshop at IMC. And let me say first that Public Conversations Project was founded about 25 years ago. Our approach is one that was derived from family therapy, not from conflict resolution. But it emphasizes the creation of safe space so that people can hear each other's narratives, so that people can become interested and begin to build connection with each other. When I heard the narrative of the pastor and the imam, I was immediately captured and thought, these are people with whom I would love to be able to work. And it only took about 2.5 years and a lot of joint proposal writing and patience to make that happen through the grace of USAID. But after the workshop in 2010 that I delivered at IMC. This is what Imam Sani, the alternate Imam, as he refers to himself, said about our approach. And that led to the idea of combining a scripturally based approach that IMC uses with the public conversations approach that's been used to address issues relating to differences of values, identity, and worldviews in many, many different areas, both intra-religious, inter-religious, but also with issues like abortion, environment, the red-blue divide here in the States. So we began to work together and try to come up with a way of melding the two approaches to dialogue and utilizing narrative to expand the tools. So our purposes in the reflective structured narrative approach are to help people to reflect on the scriptures, to help them to reflect on their most important and highest values and belief, to be able to connect across religious differences, to be able to rehumanize the other and oneself, and, as you've heard from both Pastor James and Imam Ashafa, to commit to peace building through action together. Some of the values that we promote include connection and community, interdependence, a recognition that we are all in this together, that we all have our faith. Although there may be some common areas, there may also remain differences. What reflective structured narrative approaches aim to prevent our emotional hijacking or lizard brain. So many of you are aware of how our neurobiology influences our ability to retain our highest purposes, be aware of them, and act on our best impulses. When any of us, and Imam Ashafa spoke about how important religion is in Nigeria, when any of us feels a threat to values that matter deeply to us, we become more reactive, hyper-aroused, hyper-vigilant, and the likelihood of a cycle of trigger, defend, and attack can take place. So they both spoke also about the kind of stereotyping and demonization that starts at a very early age. Some of the tools for reflective structured narrative approaches and the creation of safe enough space that makes it possible for people to hear each other's narratives, to hear the remarkable stories, not just of Pastor James and Imam Ashafa, but the stories that all the people who come together, Christians and Muslims, to share in northern Nigeria and to be able to encounter each other in a more human way, include slowing things down, basically avoiding lizard brain and emotional hijacking by utilizing communication structures of asking people to think before responding, of taking a minute to reflect, and then speaking sequentially rather than just jumping in all over the place where there's a higher likelihood that the old destructive conversation will take place. We also utilize communication agreements or guidelines. In some religious communities, people talk about these as covenants. And these are some examples that we use, asking people, unless they have been anointed by a higher power, to speak from their faith, but not as if every Muslim or every Christian agrees with them, to ground themselves in their life experience, but to speak as an individual. We ask them to share airtime and not interrupt so that people feel that they are deeply heard. And finally, often people appreciate some kind of confidentiality, which is up to them to determine the form of. Next. We also ask people questions. the kinds of questions that hopefully open up fresh, new, different conversations that are not the polarized, old, destructive ones. We ask people to speak from their life experience of the importance and impact of their faith. We ask them to speak about what are their core beliefs and what is most central, what's at the heart of the matter. And we also ask them, and we've learned not to ask them in Nigeria to speak about gray areas because that's a common language in American English. It makes no sense whatsoever to Nigerians. Got it. But we ask them to speak about the gray areas, the complexities, any shifts in their beliefs over time. And finally, our apps to be 21st century. So reflective, structured narrative approach can be used in workshops and trainings. It can be used in small group dialogues, in mediations, meeting design and facilitation, coaching, in a variety of settings. And that's what we're going to be together putting into a, Darren says it should be an ebook. It'll go up on the websites, it'll be published, it may be an ebook, who knows. But where I'd like to end with is just something that I've heard from my friends in Nigeria that I think reflective, structured, narrative approaches are well designed to address, and that's the sense that no one in northern Nigeria wants to be Chrislam. They're Christian or they're Muslim. There may be some commonalities, but there remain differences. The choice, as Audre Lorde said, is how do we engage those differences? Thank you.
Thank you. Dave, if I may, with a quick 60-second follow-up, I think one of the challenges we faced in trying to develop a hybrid model, and I think for many here as well, doing the sort of work that we do, is certainly with religious figures, you know, scripture and presenting one's spiritual views, which can be very strong, are central parts of the conflict resolution model. So for instance, you know, if I'm a pastor working in Nigeria and I'm working with a Christian population, I'm going to rely very heavily on spiritual texts. And as a religious figure, part of my job is to tell them what is right and wrong. And that can be a very effective part of the model. The model in the PCP model is very much an elicitive one where the model doesn't tell you what to do. It doesn't have its own, it has a value orientation, but it's not prescribing a particular value orientation. So that meshing of sort of a more or less secular model with a religious model raises some difficulties. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about that tension for a minute.
I'll try. So one of the things about a reflective, structured narrative approach that I think is very well suited to Nigeria and to many places, especially where people are very fervent believers, is the idea that no one is asked to compromise. No one is asked to find common ground, to negotiate their faith. One of the fears that people of faith often have about this approach, if they're not acquainted with it, is the idea that you're just trying to trick them in there so that they can find common ground and lose what is most important to them. And that is, in fact, not at all the case. So, that's a good piece. And what I would say remains a somewhat challenging and interesting piece that we'll continue to be working on together is the fact that, as you suggested, that our approach at PCP is one that asks people to reflect on what is most important to them and to speak in ways that are not attempts to convince or persuade others. In a context where people hold religious title, where people have depth of knowledge, that's something that is often important for them to share, and we want that to happen. We want people to be sharing that. One of the things that we're trying to figure out is exactly this point of how do we help people to feel that, yes, bring your whole self here, bring what is important to you, bring the teachings, and also recognize that these are true for you they may not be true for those of another faith. One of the things that I learned from Pastor James and Imam Ashafa is the idea that it's not for you to judge the faith or teachings of the other. So,
Thank you. Mads, would you like to come up here? Okay. Okay. Mads Palihapatia of MOPIC. Welcome.
I think I prefer the term MOPC. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about conflict early warning and how it's been used to prevent religious violence and other types of violence in northern Nigeria. Is this PowerPoint presentation visible? Can I switch it on?
Yeah, it's on.
Is it on?
It's on. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I'm going to talk about the early warning system that is currently being developed in Sri Lanka. I'm also going to talk about early response and some of the mechanisms that IMC is using. I'll be talking a little bit about early warning at the beginning, just to set the stage for this new generation of early warning system that we are implementing in northern Nigeria. Okay. So here's a very broad definition of early warning. It's about systemic collection and analysis of data, anticipating the escalation of violence and development of strategies and informing major stakeholders. The new generation of early warning system that I am talking about is called community-based early warning. There's a bit of a problem with the lexicon, and we're still working on what we actually mean by early warning. Does it mean something that happens before an event, during an event, or after an event? But this particular version of early warning that we are implementing in northern Nigeria is called third generation citizen-based or community-based early warning. The model or the principles based on is based in Sri Lanka, where I come from, where we established the first such early warning system in Sri Lanka. And very much to do with religious violence. The reason why we created the early warning system was because 14 crosses that we erected by an evangelical group were destroyed, and then a Muslim mosque was desecrated, which resulted in religious violence in the eastern part of Sri Lanka, which was threatening to derail the ceasefire and the peace process that was in place in 2001, 2002. It was very much a organic process of developing early warning, but it also combined early response. So it was not just about warning, but also acting on those warnings. I'm going to go deeper into some of these principles later on, but I thought I would just walk you through this model real quick. Third generation early warning is about local people and having local people own and implement early warning systems. It's about local participation and accountability. It's about the global south, quote unquote, the global south helping the global south in terms of local people in conflict affected areas in the developing world, coming up with their own strategies to generate warnings and to implement early response. It's about giving the power back to the people, and it's about understanding what conflictual and peace precipitants exist before violence erupts. And I gave this presentation to the Genocide Prevention Advisory Network in Stockholm. This type of warning system, if put in place early on, can prevent, I believe, mass atrocities and genocide, but that's a separate conversation. One of the important things that was found about this early warning system, and there's a fascinating book about this system by MIT, it's called Technology for Violence Prevention, is the ability to interrupt violence, especially cyclical violence. The book found that this type of system can reduce the lethality of violence by up to 26%, which can be significant in a given situation. This is the early warning portal that we created. I'm just going to rush through because you don't really have a lot of time. This is the architecture, and we see in Nigeria a similar architecture coming up. We talked about track 1, track 2, and track 3, the government, civil society, and community-based groups. We are creating an information center type of an infrastructure in northern Nigeria called CPCC with active early response mechanisms on the ground through the community mediation and mitigation councils, regional councils. These are some of the early warning analytics that we are trying to bring in. As you can see, this analytic model was developed in Sri Lanka, and when it drops down to this red line here, there is an escalation in violence. And a database type of a tool where we systematically collect, analyze each and every incident, which is both conflictual and cooperative, and try to understand the deeper meanings of the trends. And also geographical information systems. As you can see concentration of violence in particular geographic areas, which helps intervention. And now about transferring some of these principles from Sri Lanka to northern Nigeria. We conducted our first training in June 2013, and one of the things that we are trying to do in Nigeria is actually to coordinate some of the existing early warning and early response activities that are being done in Nigeria already. And transferring of evidence-based principles, the Nigerian, the Interfaith Mediation Center has identified certain best practice principles that can be transferred to the Nigerian context. We developed specific indicators for Nigeria, and we are using the conflict mitigation and mediation regional councils to do the early response actions. And we are also developing a new early warning database, which is a cloud-based system which assists in real-time coding, and also a mobile application, in addition to some trend analysis work. So IMC early response is very interesting. We had a separate session trying to understand what sort of community-based capacity IMC has. And what we found was that this last diagram, which is of a formal interreligious association, does exist in the IMC context in northern Nigeria, which is very exciting because when you formalize interethnic interreligious associations like this, it gives you much more strength when you're intervening in violent conflict. Whereas in some of the other models where you would bring two different groups for a meeting and they would disperse, when you formalize these associations and people interact on a daily basis, that tends to have a much more positive impact on preventing violence. And this is how some of those response networks are working. You can see some pictures that Seth Karamage, our program manager, sent me yesterday of how these groups are interacting with each other. These are these formal interethnic associations that I talked about. And here's another interesting model of how peace-promoting religious leaders and practitioners and groups can influence violence-promoting religious leaders and, pressed the wrong button, groups. And this is also another interesting model that IMC is implementing. So some of the challenges. We're trying to prevent medium to high intensity violence, but there's also a dimension of terrorism and an active insurgency on the ground in some states in the north. So that's a huge challenge. So we talk about operational early warning, which is to deal with direct violence. We talk about structural early warning and early response to address structural violence. These are two things that are happening simultaneously, but these things usually take a little bit of time. Safety of the field officers, the community peace observers, and all the community-based organizations who are working with IMC on this. As you know, early warning can sometimes be understood or misunderstood as intelligence gathering, and we have a serious problem around that. We had a serious problem in Sri Lanka around that. So the challenge of local and religious leaders organizing early warning and early response in areas that are dominated by extremist groups, supporting critical mass of religious bodies to continue this type of work. These are some of the challenges and opportunities as well. I will leave with 3 questions broadly. One to do with citizen-based early warning, about how we can effectively strengthen citizen-based early warning in areas that are affected by religious tension, and how can we use early warning to effectively address such tension. And I'm not only talking about northern Nigeria, I'm talking about Burma and some of the other countries as well. And in areas dominated by violent armed actors, what are some of the strategies that we can use to help and sustain coexistence work that local religious leaders and their constituencies are doing? And what strategies are available to peace-promoting religious leaders and groups to effectively address violent religious extremism? I think that concludes my talk. Okay. Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Mads, if you would just stay here one moment. I would like to ask you one quick follow-up question.
I thought I was done.
For a minute.
Okay.
No, we're not letting you get away that easy. So I think I'd like you to talk about the specifics of working with religious actors in an early warning system in terms of how they're different than working with other civil society actors. One of the central goals of the system is to try to fight the rumor mill, for instance, and as Pastor James says, and Imam Ashafa says, you can kill someone for a rumor. Trying to sort of to manage that. One of the benefits of working with religious figures certainly is that they have a certain credibility. And so when a religious network says this is a rumor or this is true,
yes,
it brings in that sort of strength. But are there other sort of elements that are sort of particular strengths of working with that, but also challenges of working with a strongly religious network as opposed to, say, a civil society network that may have a host of other actors engaged, not just religious figures?
I think that's a really good question. I'll try to answer that. I think it's very pertinent to talk about this because there's a lot of hate speech or dangerous speech that's been delivered from the pulpit, so to speak. And if you look at northern Nigeria, if you look at Burma, there's one organization in Burma that comes to mind called 969 that uses Buddhist principles of nonviolence and tolerance to perpetrate violence against the Muslim community, to boycott Muslim business establishments, all the way up to attacks on Muslims in Burma. So one of the things that we have used with early warning systems is actually the early response mechanisms and the ability to quickly identify facts on the ground as they unfold. One of the things that happens oftentimes is that there's a spread of rumors, and the speed with which rumors spread, whether it's to text messaging or word of mouth, is extremely fast. So you need to actually have a system on the ground that can counter the spread of rumors at that same speed or faster. And that's what community-based early warning must do and has done in several examples. But it's a challenge. It's a challenge. It's a daily challenge. The other thing is to work with groups on the ground on a day-to-day basis, as opposed to waiting for the signals to arise, to identify some of the structural conditions that create this type of hate speech, and to counter that through religious bodies and formal associations. So that would be my quick answer. I hope.
Okay, let's switch here real quick. All right, thank you very much. Because of our technical difficulties at the start of the session, we got a later start than I had hoped. And so the promised interactive method I wanted to use, I think we may have to wait for some of the later panels to see if we can engage that. Because the one thing I don't want to keep you from is lunch, which is waiting for you right here as soon as we're finished. But I would like to give you at least some opportunity to ask some questions. And so we'll do it much as we did last time, where we'll have the microphones going around the room. So if you would, definitely sort of maybe let's take just a few seconds to think a little bit about what was presented up here. Again, we're looking for models or lessons learned from the Nigeria example that might be relevant to the work that you're doing or that you're interested in, but we're also looking for questions that are unanswered, questions that need to be addressed, as some of our panelists have mentioned. Yes, will we start with you, please?
I have a question with Madhawa, if I'm pronouncing the right name, regarding the early warnings and early response system. I'm just interested to know how they ensure the quality or the validity of data which is being input into this model. That is one. And the second is how the computer-mediated communications, the live data you are considering in this particular model to make the decision or create the early warnings.
Can you repeat the second part of your question?
How you are considering or as an input the computer-mediated communications to make a decision or to make sure as an early response indicators or the reflected responses. Because we are living in a social media today. I'm not sure in those remote villages of Nigeria or Bangladesh the technology is available or not, but I believe it is. How you are taking care of that part as an input to this particular model for the ER and EW?
Can I?
Yes, go ahead.
Those are two good questions.
The first question on data.
Yes.
And then the second question on the early response, right?
The verification of data is a critical part of community-based early warning. That's why having the local actors involved and in terms of both collecting, analyzing, verifying data and putting this data into the database is extremely important. One of the things that we are developing now for Nigeria is an email alert system whenever data comes into the database for a group of people to look at that data and to say whether it's accurate or not. In a very fluid environment, that becomes a serious challenge. That's why we need to have highly trained information analysts who are community members as well, people who understand the deep-lying dynamics of a particular conflict based on the context within which that conflict arises. But it's a work in progress. There's no silver bullet. It's something that each early warning system struggles with when they are dealing with conflicts that are that localized. The other piece about technology, we are using a database which is a cloud-based environment, which has a mobile application, but early warning is not limited to that type of technology. We have seen in different parts of the world, particularly, I don't know whether you have heard, I'm sure you have heard of Joseph Kony. His activities were actually tracked in Congo using low frequency and high frequency radio. So if you have a critical mass of people, if you have the appropriate technology, it doesn't have to be high-tech, artificial intelligence-based computing. It can be something as simple as radio communications. And now we're talking about other things like balloon mapping, sending up a weather balloon with a camera on it, cost about $100. So on and so forth. There are so many things, and even technology like drones. I don't want to get into that because they're very controversial. But humanitarian purposes, for humanitarian purposes, there are lots of different technologies. But starting with what is basic and what is easily available is the way to go, and that's how we have started here in Nigeria. Text messaging, even making a simple telephone call, but it can be as basic as low frequency or high frequency radio. I hope that answers that question.
Thank you. Okay, a couple more questions. Can we take a few? Yeah, David, please.
Thank you very much, Darren. I'd like to pick up on a question that you actually asked Dave Joseph, but ask it also of Imam Ashafa, in particular, since you come from Nigeria, and I'm glad to see you again. The question really was, how do you deal with religious authorities who tell people what their values ought to be? They see it as their purpose, in fact, to teach those values, and yet to still have a collaborative or inclusive or investigatory kind of response that Dave Joseph was talking about. You come from a background where long history of your family that did that. Pastor James, also on the Christian side. And then you've got Boko Haram, which emphasizes, in fact, how important it is on a particular value system for what they consider to be the values that Islam ought to be in favor of. So how do you deal with all of that as a Nigerian, and given your vast experience? I'd be curious to know. And also, I invite the General, if you have any comments to add, I'd be glad to hear those as well.
Please. Yeah. So, Dave, can you repeat the last part of your question? Yeah.
Basic question is, how do you deal with a society in which religious leaders often see their role as telling what the values ought to be, given a more collaborative, investigatory response that, or process that Dave Joseph is proposing, and I know that you've also developed? How do you deal with that, though, in a society where religious leaders are expected and see that as their role? And that's the basic question.
So with religious leaders being expected to engage in preaching and values-based teachings, how can you reconcile that with the sort of approach Dave Joseph is talking about of reflective dialogue?
It is very, very easy. The values within religious tradition, the ideal value religious is supposed to promote is an inclusive value. And in the values of tradition, especially the Abrahamic tradition that I know, they negate the concept of humiliating the other. They negate its principles. It's seriously against the concept of humiliations or sinking down. Even though you disagree with the other, he deserves a symbol of respect. These are values within these traditions. So we told any religious leaders, let's look at the golden rule, for example. The simple is the golden rule. Love for your neighbor what you love for yourselves. If this is the golden rule found within the Jewish scripture, the New Testament affirming, and the last testament, the Quran, reaffirming this particular old, new, and the last, if they are within those traditions and they are a symbol, so if I want to promote my religion, I want to evangelize, I want to go into da'wah of calling the other to my faith, I should call them with a sense of respect for their honor, for their dignity. So that aspect, we emphasize. Normally we ask them to give us. We bring the value and say, can you give us a scriptural text that promote, within disconnect, we have what we call disconnectors, connectors and disconnectors. What are values that connect us together as a human family? You forget about religion. They will bring those values out. These same religious extremists, they bring those values that bring the human family in one box. They all accepted that. We are all human. Then the values that disconnect us in terms of our own truth versus their own truth. My truth versus our truth versus their truth. And what is the absolute truth? Now, in the concept of our truth and their truth, we promote the key value that says, even though we have our truth, they also have their own truth. Even though we want all of them to accept our truth, there is a process that will encourage them to see the beauty of my truth. For example, I want everybody in this room to be a Muslim. That is my dream. If you ask, perhaps, the pastor, James, his dream is everybody here to be a Christian. So if this is our dreams, what do we do to actualize our dream of everybody accepting our truth as the absolute truth? without hurting that particular person. This is the metaphor of interfaith theology of communication. Under interfaith theology of communications, we promote saying it as it is without hurting the other persons. And we bring examples from our scriptural text to lead the discussions. So therefore, that religious leader, because there are 3 types of religious leader we have. 3 types. I'm sorry if I go to that. The first one is incapable religious leaders. Incapable, he couldn't wait to be taught. He couldn't wait to pass through the process of learning, both in terms of physical knowing the theological framework and in terms of metaphorical interpretations, not just literal, because Semitic languages are subjected to both literal and metaphorical interpretations. They couldn't wait for that. So they see everything from the elementary level, not from the level of maturity. That is one. They are danger for the communities. The second category are the mischievous religious leaders. They know it, they know the text, they know the scripture, they are a moving encyclopedia, but they are possessed by greed. Greed, materialism, egocentrism has taken hold of them. So they are so materialistic that it is what they want to achieve that they go for, not the ideal. So this category are the second category. They are minority, but very dangerous minority, and very super active. They dine with the political actors, they dine with the criminal, they dine with the rogue, with everybody. As long as it is paid them, they're going to play the card. And they will convince the silent, the ignorant majority, using the same scriptural text to affirm that it is logical. They are the enemy. They justify violence. They justify demonization of the other with the scriptural text. Then you have the third one, who is the ideal religious leaders, who live on the values and principles of that religion, that see the human family as a whole, with the wall of those who believe and those who doesn't believe in him. He sees them as the same part of the master plan of the divine. And he navigates his way, encouraging all others to be the best of what they want to be, but helping them at the same time to see the truth he holds as absolute truth, without condemning their own worldview of their own truth. So today, when a child or a follower fall into the hand of the other two, the incapable and the mischievous, the product is going to produce are what you see on the street today, those who hijack our religious values and committing the worst inhuman assault and brutality. So these are the way we play the cards, helping them to see it, give scripture, we have what we call face to faith. Within our face, what is the position of this? And they will tell you the ideal. But if they are alone, without any other person, they can muzzle and play with it. Because when they quote the scripture out of context, we'll have others in the same room who will say, no, you are quoting that out of context. Yes, Jesus said, he who have no sword should sell his coat and buy one. Yes, Jesus said it. However, the same Jesus said, he who killed by the sword is going to die by the sword. So if you say, or the Muslims say, we have to go on jihad against those and wipe them away. Who are those who are working on the jihad against them? They say, nah, the same Quran says, those you have no right to fight against those who does not drive you out of your homes, who does not persecute you or humiliate you or kill you. You cannot fight them. You have to protect them.
Thank you very much, Imam. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The question was directed to you. Do you want to have a quick, would you like a quick comment? Okay, one last quick comment from General Dambazo, and then we'll wrap up.
Just for emphasis, the danger lies on those who want to present extreme views or give their own interpretations or understanding or misrepresentation, I would call it. I give you an example. There was an officer who initially was involved in the operations in the Northeast against Boko Haram. And there was this chap, some of them they arrested. I think he said about 5 of them they arrested. And it was time, you know, they wanted to handle them in a way that they would give them a lot of information. So it was time for prayers. So they asked them, you know, to perform ablution if they want to join them for prayers. And they were all surprised, say, soldiers, do you pray? Because that is the kind of perception they have, the kind of information given to them that when you see somebody in uniform, he's a non-believer, eliminate him and things like that. So that is the danger of it. And these are people, boys who are, you know, in their teens. And you imagine what happens when, you know, probably they started hearing this from childhood. So that is where the danger lies. So the danger is, that's why I said, a major problem in our society today is lack of regulation. Everybody comes up to be a pastor or an imam only to make money. So how do you regulate that so that he doesn't start, you know, telling people the wrong things? And he will have followers. So how do you regulate that? And that is a major challenge. Thank you.
Thank you. Dave, one last quick comment?
Sure. Thank you for asking the question. And I'm not an imam or pastor, so I'm so glad that you directed it to Imam Ashafa. But one of the things that we're working on, that we are very clear on at IMC in the production of this, and the reason for the hybrid model is that we have a sense that there really is a scriptural basis for a lot of the practices that we at PCP typically employ, and we're working together to try to integrate those. So both Imam Ashafa, Pastor James, and the alternate pastors and imams are also contributing scripture, as you just heard, that supports these practices. But that's part of the challenge, so thanks for asking.
Okay, my thanks to all of you. Sorry again that we got a bit of a late start with the technical difficulties. My thanks to Pastor James as well, who is watching us on Skype, and who, unfortunately, we were not able to engage as fully. If I can invite Eben Weitzman up to close the panel, but let me just say quickly, while he's coming up, we do have lunch right here ready for you, and then our next keynote will speak at 1 o'clock. So please do grab some lunch and join at 1. And also for our viewers at home, I was neglectful in mentioning that you can engage in the discussion on Twitter with hashtag Slomoff 2014. That's SLOMOFF 2014. Evan, welcome.
Thank you all very much. We have gifts from the department for all of our speakers. Thank you again for a wonderful, wonderful panel. Thank you. Enjoy your lunch, everyone.